Hi, this is Brent. Today I just want to talk about some good reference books and thoughts on for drawing or designing, particularly for like drawing, like human form. I know most of my videos are dealing with like SDF and um, and intuitive drawing and stuff. And sometimes I forget that sometimes people just want to know, like like hey, dude, all I want to know is like, how do I get started? Or what did you use to get started in this whole entire process that you've been doing throughout your career type of thing, right? Um, and so here are just like here are four of my favorite foundation books, right? So the first, well, actually it should be five. Why it should be five? Because the other one should be how to draw comics the Marvel way. But everybody can find that. Um, as I said before in one of my earlier bids, that I was given that as a gift from somebody from high school, back in high school. I was like 15 or something like that, 15, 16. And it was the actual hardcover of it. But anyway, that's a good solid one too, because they go over the volumes and everything like that, as well as the comic book aesthetic, right? Right. Um, but uh to then go to, okay, so where did those cats get their ideas from? What's the actual foundation for a lot of this without going too far back in time? So I'll just go to my popular people and even more current people, or current meaning like not in any classic period. But of course, my very first one is Hogarth, right? Any of the Hogarth series on dynamic anatomy. Um, because he's dealing with most people that will attract their attention, whether you draw females or males, because he approaches like hardcore anatomy and hardcore figurative drawing from a dynamic standpoint. Statuette. That's basically what we're really talking about here. You're talking about like 9 heads high and outside of the 6 head high type thing. Uh, and so here you have a good example for those who have seen it, for those who haven't. But really, we're in the digital age now, so a lot of um, a lot of I don't think a lot of people collect books or go to the bookstore to find a lot of art books these days. They really just, I believe a lot of people are just finding references online, stuff online. Um, but if you're looking for like hard sources, like like this is dynamic figure drawing, which is just like the straight volume, right? I believe you can get this like an entire collection, or you can get all the books separate. He has dynamic hands and everything. Um, but Hogarth particularly deals with the volume aspect of the form, right? And I think that, once you get past like the whole, everybody's made out of cones and blocks and all that stuff like that, is the rounding out of the form is how does the torso look? How does the thigh look in when it's being utilized, right? How does it look in relationship to each other? Um, let's go over here. Yeah. Okay. And he deals with shading and everything, but the main thing is the rounding of the forms, the rounding of the forms, the rounding of the forms. You're not drawing things as squares, as far as like muscle structures of squares. And so I find this to be like, it's actually an essential book, because when you're doing, if you're actually in a life drawing class, then if you add these processes and techniques, then it will really enhance your life drawing. If you're doing drawing from your imagination, it will do the same thing. So, uh, in a quick one, that's Hogarth. All right. Uh, Second one up, of course, would be Bridgman. Right. So I have the small books. This is the big one that they reprinted like a lot of the books into one. The reason why I talk about Bridgman, and I've talked about it a lot when I was teaching and everything, because it deals with the human form heavily from a mechanical structure, right? So it allows it allows you to be able to see how the body. When I'm doing my drawing, and I'm talking about the body collapsing upon itself, and how I spin my drawing upside down to see how it collapses upon itself. From Bridgman, you can see how the body's constructed in a manner in which it would, because of its weight, it collapses a certain way. Let me see if I can go to a good one here. He goes over the mechanics. He goes over the mechanics of how the neck moves, but not just how the neck moves, like from just an anatomical stage, but from a artistic stage. In other words, like how if the artist is showing trying to show muscles that's being stretched or something like that, how could they interpret what how could they interpret that visually? What is the actual movement? And then how can it be interpreted visually? Right? That's what makes his stuff so special. So his stuff is not about, necessarily in these book series, not necessarily about rendering or anything like that. It's about the functionality of the human form from the artistic perspective, right? And some of the stuff will always stay with you, like how, like when some people draw, they may draw, okay, I'm gonna draw a tricep area, like because that's the way Jim Lee draws it, or something like that. But if you understand how the mechanics of it, then you can gesture it in, you can interpret, you can do your own interpretation, and then that way your art is truer to yourself, right? So anyway, on a quick one, oh, I always love some Bridgman. I love some Bridgman. All right, some Bridgman. Um, let's get into some. Which one is this? Oh boy. Okay, you heard. So sometimes I mention names. Not, everybody's heard of Frazetta, but I'm not sure if everybody heard of Hajime Suriyama, right? But Suriyama, he's Mr. Sexy Robot, and of course Dinoids. As I said before, like this is his masterwork edition, right? And I spilled something on it. Um, as I said before, uh, as I said before, um, his stuff can be very extreme, right? Just letting you know. So I'm not going to show anything explicit on here, right? Quick, I'm just going. Oh, here you go. I'm going to go straight to what I want to talk about was how he deals with chrome, how he deals with metal, and that's how he came about. That's how he came to my attention, right? Because when I was doing airbrush, well, still do airbrush, but as learning airbrush illustration and everything like that, um, he all his stuff is airbrush and watercolor mix. So, and he's the go-to person when it comes to like how to represent metal. But I do everything in a more gestury fashion. So nowadays, but his I want to say the psychology, yeah, his psychology of how to represent metal rings true, no matter if you're doing it gesturally, or if you're doing it in a very, very technical manner as what he's doing here. Let me just make sure I can put this a page that's safe. Oh, this is a great example. This is a very, very good example. Had a large poster of this one, right? So Soriyama, and now that's why I always talk about like doing a horizon, and then you have the gradating sky. Regardless how deep you go into it, regardless if you're trying to be so reflective or you're just trying to gesture it in, the logic behind it still rings true, right? So he's a good person to look at. All right. So we just round this out with, of course, with some Frank. Okay. Right. So we round it out with some Frank. So, you know, Frank is considered like the artist, right? The master's master. Okay. As far as the contemporary commercial work, prior to digital, and now, not and uh, there's a whole other video about like digital versus studio. Um, which one emotes more, but it all depends. Because there are people who work digitally, and once again, and they harness that whole studio aspect within their work, and they're able to do a lot of expressive stuff behind it. So I'm not knocking. I'm not in between. I do digital too. So, but as far as look back as a reference, not necessarily to draw Frazetta, but to but to begin to understand his psychology behind how he designed his characters. I always say that from my examination, my personality also my personality type is INTJ, right? So I'm ultra analytical. Okay, I'm ultra analytical. So I always think that everybody's being ultra analytical whenever they do anything they do. I'm assuming they are. That's exactly how I work. But I realize that that's actually not the case. People will do more copying than they'll do understanding of philosophy behind something. But if you can understand the philosophy behind Frazetta, who is somebody who never really talked about his own philosophy much at all, if you can see into his philosophy, you will become a very rich artist. Um, I found that his his mail, as I said before in other videos, that his mails are referenced more so reference meaning like conceived, conceived more so from like males or simian and females or feline, right? And you can see that if you, well, not necessarily in the well, you'll see it in the Conan, yes, you will. But if for the feline standpoint, this is this this is his this is his this is his signature type female here, right? This in the Catwoman, the Catwoman painting, right? This is like a Frazetta, okay? This is a very feline, even the eye positioning and everything, very feline type character, feminine character that he repeats over and over and over and over again. The males, not the Tarzan stuff. Tarzan is a little too thin. Oh, the Berserker. Oh wait a minute. I'm about to get become a fanboy in a second. Hold on. Let me see if I can get a let me see if I can get a good example like this one. Oh, here is a good example. Where we're well, obviously this is literal. Where all where the majority of the males are simian, right? Even the hero is simian. You'll see how Frank when he gnarls when you study his work when you see how he gnarls the male hand particularly. Female hands are usually like this, very fluid and open, right? Male hands are usually gnarled like this, very grunt like, almost simian like. The toes are the same way. The big toe always sticks out, regardless of who it is, always sticks out separate, very similar to to a ape, to a simian, right? And that approach, I'm not saying he never wrote and said that he did that, but this is what from my examination, right? When let me see, okay, this is good. This is a good example. When a very I think this is a very simian structure, right? How the belly's coming down. This is very. If you think about what a silverback gorilla looks like. Now, of course, this is a male, human male. But we think about the abdominal structure of a silverback gorilla, then it starts to harken to like how Frazetta approaches the male structure, right? And why it looks so dynamic. Because gorillas, even female gorillas, look dynamic. There's something about the structure. Um, so, in any case, this is Frank becomes the quintessential artist to study as far as the human form um, is concerned in a dynamic aspect, right? Uh, but when you're dealing with Frank, I think it's even better. I think it's even better. Rough work. I think it's even better to deal with Frank from a drawing standpoint, like his gesture drawings before he did the paintings. That actually gives you a lot of information to what he's actually thinking. A lot of just because things tighten up and tighten up. It's like what Todd McFarlane would say. By the time he tries to lay down his drawings and then not adjust them at all or whatever that type of a thing, because he says that once you start going over and over, it just you start to tighten up and stiffen up and stiffen up and stiffen up. So if you can go to Frank's original gestures before things started tightening up, or just his block-ins, or he would just say, these are just thumbnails that he did to send off to the client, right? But there's so much power in some of this stuff, so much power in it, right? That you see that you really, and then you really begin to see like how is he thinking of the female form? How is he thinking? Once again, here's the male form. How is he thinking of the male form? Here's a good page, right? And that becomes a clearer thing to study, right? Now, I just want to wrap it up with a quick thing about so those who are making those who are even if you're professional, you do commercial productions and stuff like that. You still may not all depends on when you introduce the digital work and everything, because that really matters because digital consumes a lot of your analytical mind when it comes to understanding and studying stuff. Um, when a lot of people were Like when I was growing up, everything was about like Marvel comics, right? So everybody wanted to draw like Marvel comics pretty much until I went to my commercial art classes in high school. Then my commercial art teacher was like, anybody can draw like that. He was like, here's heavy metal, here's Epic Magazine, and all of a sudden we were introduced to all these wild artists with all these wild styles, and I was like, oh my gosh! And then we were like, everybody wanted to be unique. Remember, I always say back when I grew up, it was no one wanted to be what we called a fighter. You know, I'm from the Northeast, right? So no one wanted to be a fighter. No one wanted to copy. Even though Marvel was popular, when once we were introduced to, hey, you can do anything. Look at all these different styles out here. Look at all these different approaches. Everybody grabbed onto that. Everybody just went for it. But the reason why I say that is because that period of time had changed. I remember, I think it was in the 90s. I remember when manga became manga manga comics became very popular in the United States, and so kids growing up were copying a lot of manga, and looking at anime and copying a lot of manga. The problem with that is that first off, that's a whole art style to a whole culture of and, and race of people, right? Um, and then when you get into their thing, then you got to go into all down to the sumi brush style work. And, you know, it has a massive history. But all the young artist wants to do is just copy Pokemon or copy a manga character or copy a robot or copy something like that. Just copy, copy, copy. Not even knowing where the original source material comes from or why they even chose that. And the reason why I say it because sometimes the anatomy, when you deal with the anatomy related stuff, not the robotic stuff, not the cool creature stuff, but the anatomy stuff can sometimes be far left, right? Or far like, like, whoa, like what anatomy is that? But they deal with line and stuff differently, and in a lot of cases, their line work means different things than if you were doing like Western style anatomy and stuff, right? We won't be doing line work for that. But the reason why I say that is, I don't want to throw Frank. I'm just going to talk from over here though. The reason why I want to say that is, when just real fast, if I can do a little sketching, let's do a little sketching on everything, right? Um, most most people would even if they're drawing, if they brought their work to me, I would say for a lot of artists, I would say your work looks flat, and they would say, "What do you mean looks flat?" So because they would have, let's say, their favorite character. I'm just drawing something. Let's say they have their favorite character, and it's got ears and it's got the little thing or whatever it is. And when they were drawing it, they were drawing it regardless of what the pose is. It could be a very popular pose, but regardless of whatever it is, they were drawing it exactly how I'm drawing it, which is they're looking at the contours of the form, right? They're looking at the contours of the form. It took me a while, even wow, yeah, it took me a while. Even working in commercially in Manhattan, I was still, even though my stuff was what I would consider very tight then, it was very successful. Um, but I was still mostly looking at everything from a two-dimensional standpoint. I wasn't looking at things from a three-dimension. This is the two-dimensional. I wasn't looking at it from the three-dimensional standpoint. It wasn't until I got into like comic book illustration, understanding comic book illustration, that I started looking at it from the three-dimensional standpoint. And then everything kind of exploded after that. The reason why this is paramount, the three-dimensional understanding when you go to draw or design, is because this is this is technically a representation of a three-dimensional form. But when you're drawing it, all you're doing is you're just drawing somebody else's drawing. All right, you're just looking at what they drew, and then you're just redrawing it. That's why we say when you study, let's say, comic book illustration, which takes a little bit more time. When you do comic book illustration, you should be looking through. Let me see if I can get this one working. We talk about, yes, there is the whole thing of yes, there is the whole thing of, okay, so this is your head, this is your torso, this is your pelvis, these are the legs, right? And arms, right? Like that, right? But when we go and when we go and draw this, when we do this in for comics or comic book or dynamic work, right? Right? You're thinking of the head as a three-dimensional object and the torso as a three-dimensional object. The pelvis then becomes a three-dimensional object, right? The legs become a three-dimensional object. Regardless of how you do it. Some people do legs like as a rectangular shape. Others say, hey, do them as cylindrical shapes, right? The reason why that is because you can begin to suggest how they are in space. You do that. Like right now, this press profile, right? Let me give me a baby doll somewhere in here. There you go. Right now, this is still pretty much a profile piece, but I'm beginning to suggest how it is in three-dimensional space, right? Once you understand this, then you can construct any character. So literally, it becomes when you begin to understand how to design something in three-dimensional or the parts within three-dimensional space, then you can build anything and in any pose that you like. One of my favorite things. I don't have anything close. Do I have anything close yet? One of my favorite things is obviously I always taught to, um, because it helped me a lot, is because you can't do figure drawing like you're in class and you're being asked, you maybe a freshman class or something like that, and you're being to do figure drawing or sophomore class, and you have to work so fast, blah 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 blah. But if you have digital courses, I don't even know if they even make you do that anymore. But one of the great things to use is are toys, right? Toys are a brilliant because they're already because why or maquettes because maquettes are small. That's what I use the toys for. So they're small, so you can see all the way around them, right? So you can understand their form. Let me see. Do I have any toy close to me? No, I don't have any toy. I don't have any toy close to me. So I guess that's it for that. Well, I do have. Let me see. Let me get one of my favorite ones. Far be if I'm gonna make a video, might as well be for real. So like preach, right? So my Greg Capullo preach, nonetheless, not just preach, right? So it's Greg Capullo's preach. So this is now I wouldn't recommend this for somebody who's not learned. You could be drawing, but if you don't know how to draw from your imagination, if you can't construct three-dimensional characters dynamically in your imagination, then you're still at the beginning stages. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter what field you were in. It doesn't matter how long you've been in your career. If you don't know how to construct from your imagination, if you can't sit there and do a whole entire piece straight from your imagination without even using any visual for a character without using any visual reference and have them dynamically in three-dimensional space, then you're still at the beginning stages. But that's where maquettes come in. Ha, ha, ha. You are saved. So this is a maquette, or you know, Todd McFarlane's. Everybody would say this is a toy, but dude, I grew up with toys that could really move. Right, this thing can't move. Okay, this is a beautiful maquette. This is just a plastic version of the beautiful sculpture that somebody made. Okay, whether it was in 3D sculpture or traditional, it's just beautiful. But from here, let me just show you real quick. Da, 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 da. I didn't. Right. So I'll just go black with him. We just go straight black. Okay. So when I look at him, some people would look and they're just trying to draw the outline and everything. When I see him, I automatically see first off I see his gesture, right? So he's hunched over like this, like something like that, right? But I'm seeing all these volumes. I'm seeing his chest area. Now this paper's moving all over the place, so I'm doomed already. But I'm good. Come on. Right? Meaning good. Like I can figure it out. Um, so I'm thinking like this is his chest area. I'm thinking, okay, I see his shoulders and arms. I'm thinking of where they are in space, right? Right? His hand. Come on now, stay in place. his fist, right where his abdominal area is back here, right where his leg comes out, right? So this is like, and then I'm thinking of, okay, then he's got that, and he's coming in like here, right? Oh, okay, something like that. And but his head's much lower, and he's got these really broad shoulders. He's got real broad shoulders, and then come down, and he's got this gnarled hand thing going on, right? So that's what I. So when I was training for volumes and stuff, that's what I had. That's what I started to do. I started to. Yes, I'm using squares. You can't really see it because it's all black, right? Squares, circles, and cones. That's all I'm using, right? Square, circles, cone, right? No, square, circle, cylinder. I'm not using any cones. It's not. If there was breasts and stuff, then I would be talking about that, right? But that's what I'm thinking about. This is what I'm thinking. This is how I'm starting to break that. This is how I'm gesturing out and breaking down the form, right? I'm thinking of all the rounded parts. I'm thinking how they are three dimensionally. I'm thinking about what's coming, what's running flat to my eye versus what's coming towards me, right? Once you practice this, then you're able to then when you have your own thoughts, when you see your own characters, then you can begin to break them down on paper like that or on your screen. It frees you up. It really, really frees you up. And I believe truly, once an artist gets into this, because it's not like you don't have to be into comic books to do it. No. But in my work, whether it doesn't matter whether I'm doing 3D or studio, I cannot imagine not knowing how to do it, because it once you learn how to do your characters, once you learn how to do characters, then you can do anything. You can draw anything, any space, any character that comes to your mind. You can lay them down, and you're not tracing around them. You're not doing the outline. You're actually, and then you lay them down, and as you've seen in when I do um my biomechanical art, that you see I actually will take the forearm. I'll actually start to pose once I lay down the black. I'll begin to start to pose them a little bit or adjust their poses a little bit, because once you understand the three-dimensional form and you're able to lay it down, then you can actually manipulate it just like a toy in front of you. You can manipulate it right there on your screen or right there on your paper. This takes longer on paper because then you gotta block out and then blah blah blah, or you gotta break up some tracing paper and redo it on tracing paper and switch the positioning and blah blah blah. Or you break out your mechanical eraser and you erase, and rework it and stuff like that. But the main thing is that now you have, instead of you being locked into, this is my favorite character, he's always in this pose, which is really working in a more there's a term for that, where you're really just drawing like the signature profile of the character. You're actually now building your own, even if your character is that character. Or if you like to say you're doing like Jim Lee's Batman or something, like whatever you may be doing, whatever your interest may be. But now you're actually constructing it yourself. You're posing it yourself in your mind and actually able to interpret it right out, properly out into our world here, where people can actually see it and actually get it to communicate. See, and the thing is, watch this. In the end, it will actually communicate to the viewer what you were thinking. Because once you start manipulating, if it's something that you already know, once you start to manipulate it, it now becomes yours in a way, right? So the more you construct from your mind, the more you manipulate from your mind, the more you're actually showing everybody, or the more you're showing who you are as an artist. As I said before, like when I do my signature, and then it boils down to the whole thing about the signature. You know, yes, you can do the proper capital letter A L L E, as my name goes, right? But then if you look at my signature, you're like, where in the world did he get that line from? Like, it just all becomes like, da, 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 right? But then that is truly mine, and that's why a signature is so important. So for an artist, when you conceive from your mind, it is literally your signature. It doesn't matter if it's a comic book character or dynamic painting or what's this, or even an event design or scene from a cinematic or whatever it is. If it came from your mind and you were able to properly represent what you were conceiving from your mind, which is also could be your intuition, all depends on how deep you are going into it, right? Then it's truly yours. Now, other people may copy you, but they're copying from the original source. Your work at that very moment is original, right? And that's really what I'm talking about here. Is that was a big because I know that was a big jump for me from going from just copying work. In other words, hey, I can draw like Jim Lee, or hey, I can draw like, and it was always using that same pose, using that same thing, da da da. To hey, I'm building my own stuff in my own mind, my own characters, and then once that started, that ability to build in three-dimensional space in my mind, once that started, then it led to everything else. And then anything I could think of, I could lay down on paper or lay down on a screen, right? So hopefully that gives some understanding of how they can approach this if they're at that juncture where they want to really become uh, want to take their work to another level. Because once again, it's easy to copy. It's another thing to be original, right? And everybody is original. So just as your signature is, so is your work, right? So is your work. But you have to get to the point where your work comes out as fluidly and as intuitively as your signature does. So, any case, so thanks for listening. Right, I just wanted to do a quick vid on this. I believe somebody needs to hear this.